the quick, and let me go ahead and minimize myself so that let's see us up here. Okay, perfect. So we're gonna start with some general introductions, and I'll just, since in the interest of time, I'll have about, if maybe 2 or 3 people can volunteer and just give us an idea of who we have in the room. Um, and I'll start off by, my name is Noelle Cardina Zamora. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And the topic for today is going to be engaging the Latinx families in mental health services. Okay, so for those of you that are going to volunteer, what you're going to be sharing is your name, your title, and maybe if you'd like to share the city you grew up in. Before we get started with those intros, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So I studied psychology at Sacramento State, and then I went on to get my master's degree in clinical psychology at Pepperdine University. I specifically joined the Aliento program, which is a program that it's specifically a specialization in the Latinx community. So basically what I did is I got my MFT training with the Latinx emphasis as well. So in addition to just the regular coursework that you would do as an MFT, I also learned just the cultural considerations and cultural competency issues and just barriers that go with working with the Latinx community and how to address those in order to engage them in treatment. So that's a little bit about my background. In addition to that, I currently work as a therapist for Aldea. I provide bilingual services, and every once in a while, so usually summertime, I teach for Pepperdine University at their master's level program for education and psychology. So that's a little bit about my background. All right, so can maybe 1 or 2 of you share your name, title, and city you grew up in?
I'll go ahead and share. My name is Guadalupe Aguayo, and I work at Aldea as well as the program assistant. And I grew up in, I was born in St. Helena, so up Valley, and I grew up in St. Helena and Napa my whole life. And I spent some time in Sacramento at UC Davis, and I came back to Napa.
Awesome. And one more person that would like to share name, title, and background.
I can go. My name is Maria Vivanco. I also work for Aldea in the treatment foster care program as a behavioral support counselor. I was born and raised in Napa, went out to school in Sacramento for a bit, and then recently this year moved out to Vacaville. And yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I'll try to get through the content so we can get to the exercise. But just as an FYI, make sure that you, we're going to be doing a STAR exercise. And so what you will need to grab is, it's sufficient to just have a pen and a piece of paper for the purpose of this. But what you will be doing is you'll be picking a specific color. So we'll provide more instructions as we get closer to the exercise, but just if you have a chance now, just grab a piece of paper and a pen so you can have it handy. All right. So first we're going to start with a general definition of cultural competency. So cultural self-awareness, knowledge, and skills that facilitate the delivery of effective services to ethnically and culturally diverse clientele. So cultural competency is something that continues to be such an important need in our field, given the fact that we see very diverse clients and families at our agencies. Along with cultural competency, we have cultural humility. So cultural humility is the ability to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented or open to the other, in relation to aspects of cultural identity that are most important to the person. Part of this includes critical self-reflection and lifelong learning, recognizing and challenging power imbalances, and institutional accountability. So an example of this would be if we're told that we cannot use children, families, or others as translators, are the institutions providing an alternative and addressing this need when a language barrier is encountered? So part of what I hope to accomplish during this training is for you to really take a step back and address what are some of the barriers that you should be looking for with families that you work with or clients that you work with. It's really important for you to have just a general awareness of what some of those barriers are so that you can consider them in the future. And I'll give very specific examples as we go along, but as a general perspective is being able to really recognize and acknowledge different aspects of someone's culture that's going to impact the services you provide. That's your foundation, basically. All right, so related to mental health treatment utilization, traditional avenues for recovery and mental health treatment can vary depending on beliefs related to illness and health. Ways that people conceptualize illness influence what they perceive are viable options for restoration of health. Some of these examples include interpersonal strategies or recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses, close relations such as peers and family, religious and spiritual healing practices, and mental health counseling. So basically, one of the things that you should look at when someone accesses services is what have their experiences been accessing other resources prior to coming to you. So I've given this example in several trainings where I had a family come in and I met with a mom one-on-one. This was a case where there was a lot of trauma, really, really severe sexual abuse in all of her children. And one of the things that the mom shared with me when I explored just her access to resources was that initially, when she found out about the abuse, she went to the only place where she felt like she could go at the time, which was her local church. So she went and talked to her priest about what she had found out, that her children had been sexually abused by her boyfriend at the time. And the response she received from the priest was extremely devastating for her. So basically his response had been that it was her fault that her children had experienced that abuse because she was living in sin, bringing a man into her home without being married, and that her children were now going to become drug addicts and commit suicide because of everything that had occurred. So it took her a really long time to come back to ask for support and services because she felt like everyone would feel the same way about her, that it was her fault. So it's important to ask questions about what families' experiences have been or clients' experiences have been, because if I wouldn't have asked about what her experiences were prior to coming to see me, I would have never found out that there was a lot that needed to be done in terms of work with the mom individually on ways to address that blame and guilt that she was experiencing based on what the priest had told her. So just something to keep in mind. Another thing as well, especially with the Latinx community, and just as a side note, so I'm speaking in a very generalized way. Obviously, everyone has very individual experiences, but when I refer to the Latinx community as a whole in for the purpose of this training, it's more as based on what the research says and what my training has shown in working with these families. So definitely no generalizing, no stereotyping. That's not the goal of this training, but it's more of providing that insight and awareness based on experiences. So just as a side note. So another thing to keep in mind with religious and spiritual healing practices is that some families will also not seek treatment because there's this belief that if God gave me this this illness, for example, then that's what God wanted me to deal with. It's this dicho that says, si Dios quiere será. So if God says that it's going to be that way, then that's the way it'll be. And so sometimes people don't seek treatment because they're under this impression that God wanted them to carry this quote unquote burden, and just pray about it. So there are families who will never seek support because they feel like they just have to accept what God has given them. And that's part of what we call fatalismo in this particular community. Okay, so now trauma. So I know many of us have heard about this, but there's this ongoing research that says that adverse childhood experiences really have a significant impact on people's overall well-being, not just in the moment when they experience trauma, but in the future. So significant research has demonstrated that ACE, or adverse childhood experiences, can impact various mental and general health outcomes. The more ACEs encountered in childhood, the higher the likelihood it is that a person will suffer from chronic health and psychological conditions. And when these experiences are combined with other risk factors such as poverty, stigmatization, genetic conditions, the risk of mental health conditions can increase. So some statistics on Latinx felony arrests in juveniles. I thought this was interesting. I always like to do a little bit of research in the area before I do a training. And so if we look at this pie chart, it shows you African American and Black juveniles in the blue, dark blue. You have Hispanic and Latino juveniles in the orange, and then you have white in the green, and in the light blue you have other. So if we look on the left side, that's Napa County, and the right side is just overall California. So go ahead and just take that in a little bit. In terms of the number of Latinx felony arrests in juveniles is significantly higher for the Hispanic and Latinx population. Does anyone have any ideas or theories on what could be contributing to this number?
So the first thing that comes to mind is that Napa County in and of itself is pretty, okay, and I could be biased, so I don't have all the info, but just in my experiences, have seen that the majority of our population is Latinx. And then you have your like outside, a little further like in American Canyon, where you might have more Pacific Islander, Filipino ethnicities, but there isn't as much. I think we have a much larger Hispanic and Latinx community in Napa County that might also account for the difference in the ethnic pie chart that we are seeing here.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? So what are some risk factors for teenagers, let's say, that we might consider? So I will give you an example. So we all know Napa County is a very expensive area to live in, right? So if you are looking at a family who is really struggling to make ends meet, what are the chances that both parents are going to be working full-time jobs to provide for the families? Would you say that's pretty likely?
Yes, I would say that's pretty likely, and that they probably are working more than one full-time job.
Yes, and I would say in addition to that, so if both parents are outside of the home and working, that means chances that there are less opportunities for children to be supervised. How many of us have learned from other families, or even from personal experiences, that there are older siblings that are taking care of younger siblings because there just isn't enough childcare or support, and both parents have to go out and work to be able to pay the bills and put food on the table. So not to say that this accounts for these statistics, but just something to keep in mind when you are experiencing poverty, you're definitely going to be at a higher level of risk for being arrested, or living in a neighborhood that has a high crime rate, or or there's a lot of gangs in the area. These are all definitely factors to consider.
I was also going to mention, because my family are immigrants and I grew up in Napa, but a lot of times, you know, immigrant families, their first concern is working and they're in a whole new country. So, you know, just kind of just not being aware of like how things are, and you know, even kids not being used to how things are here, and just kind of maybe getting into trouble, or also likewise like the only place they can afford is in areas that are a bit more, you know, known for crime and not so many good things. And you know, how's a family supposed to reach out and get help if like they don't even know how to, or like it's not available in Spanish or whatever language they need it to be.
Yes, and then there's this added as well, this added factor to consider, that there's sometimes also language barriers, and I've definitely become aware of parents who end up so their child gets arrested and they end up signing a document that they really weren't fully translated, and they end up their child ends up being charged for a lot higher crimes because they just weren't read their rights properly, or the information they were given differs from what was actually on paper. So just factors to keep in mind. But thank you all for sharing. Okay, so more statistics. So another risk factor is alcohol and drug use in the past month. And here we see, once again, if you look at the blue, there's like 3 shades of blue, but right in the middle in Napa County, we see that 20.3% of Hispanic or Latinx students were using drugs or alcohol in the past month. So at least some. It doesn't indicate how much, but that's a pretty high percentage. And then as you can see, it goes from Hispanic Latino to then it goes to white, followed by American Indian or Alaska Natives, and then followed by African American or Black at 13.8%. So the impact of poverty. So possible barriers could be that basic needs are not being met. So if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what really that says is, in order for us to reach that point where we want to be self-actualized or accomplish bigger goals or find meaning in the work that we do or the life that we live, we need our basic needs to be met first. So one of the things to consider is, does a family have access to basic needs, including food? Do they need transportation? One of the things that has come up for me in sessions, I've always worked at nonprofits, so typically my population has been low income. And one of the things I experienced was, there was a family that I was working with, and one of the kids at the time was around 6 or 7, said that they needed to share something with me. This was like in the middle of a family session. They're like, I'm really embarrassed, but like, can I please tell you I have something that's really important I need to tell you and ask you. Can my mom step out of the room? So then, you know, I'm over here going into therapist mode thinking, oh my gosh, she's about to disclose like some sort of abuse, or I'm gonna have to make a report. So I was like, okay, let's have mom step outside. And I met with the child, and the child literally had told me that she was really hungry, that they hadn't eaten for 2 days now, and that it was really embarrassing for her to ask for my help, but she was hoping that I could help her mom find them food to eat for that day. And when you have a 6-year-old that's advocating for her basic needs, especially when it comes to something like food, it's absolutely heartbreaking. But how would I in that moment expect for the mom to work on addressing tantrum behaviors when she couldn't even figure out how she was going to feed her kids. So at that point, we immediately, stopped what we were working on in session and went into calling wraparound services and local food banks to be able to access support for them in that area. Another thing to consider is, as well, when it comes to transportation, when a client shows up late for session, it's important, or a family shows up late in general to an appointment, it's important to consider the fact that there might be some transportation issues that you're not aware of. I had a family who used to ride 2 buses and walk about probably 4 blocks in order to make it to our appointments. And I discovered that after probably 4 weeks of late sessions or no shows or canceled sessions. And initially I was a little frustrated because it was my latest appointment of the day. So I was already accommodating meeting them later so that they could make it on time. But one day I just sat down with the family and I asked them, hey, what's going on? I noticed that it's been 4 weeks in a row where you're not arriving on time. What's going on? Is there something that I should be aware of? Should we change our session? And come to find out, the family disclosed that when they didn't have enough gas money to make it to our appointments, they would have to ride the bus, and sometimes the bus would run late. And there were times where the family would turn back around and get on the bus and not receive their session because they had not shared with me that they were having transportation issues. So just some things to consider, that most of the time we're just kind of annoyed, right? Like, oh, they're not here. Let's cancel after the 15-minute mark. But sometimes when we explore, just the impact of poverty is so significant for some families that the fact that they're even sitting there in your office after going through all of that just to get to the appointment is, it's a miracle in itself, right? So it's important to address those needs, those basic needs, and offer resources as needed. In addition, another barrier is unstable environments. So inconsistency between caregivers. There are a lot of families who live with multiple families in the home. So this might be extremely challenging for a parent who's trying to become more consistent with their parenting style, or maybe just even being able to give a proper timeout, right? So we have to ask about that as well. So if some of you are familiar with PCIT, that specifically coaches parents on how to respond to behaviors. Part of what you learn in parent-child interactive therapy, or PCIT, is that timeouts are effective if you give a proper timeout. So it's important, if we're offering a skill to a family, that they're able to be successful in implementing it. One of the things that I found most often is that PCIT therapists would get very frustrated with families when parents did not have their assigned homework done of 15 minutes of special playtime. But there was times where we would find out that families didn't have toys at home. Some families had very, very basic things at home and were not able to even create a timeout corner with their child. So what we did as therapists is we would go in and try to find something that worked for that particular family. So it's also important to consider that, the environment. Complex trauma is another factor. So children and families living in poverty are more likely to witness violence or trauma. So once again, it goes back to, depending on the area that they live in, they might witness gang violence or shootings, or be more exposed or even more at risk to be victimized. Possible solutions would be screening for trauma and identifying if there's a family history of trauma. One of the big things that I do when I do trauma work is I create a genogram and I identify if there is any intergenerational trauma. And if the parent has experienced trauma, one of the first things I do is refer them to their own treatment so that they're able to really be present for the client when they're ready to go through their trauma narrative. All right. So more on poverty. We already talked a little bit about this. So lack of reliable transportation, it goes back to what I had mentioned about checking in with your client, and making sure that you're addressing the fact that, are they really late and pushing the boundary, or are they just not able to make it to your appointments for other reasons? Specific impact of substance abuse on Latinx population. So Latinx populations born in the US drink more than their immigrant counterparts. Latinx youth are more likely to be involved in other compulsive activities such as gambling. When Latinx and other minority adolescents associate with Caucasians who drink, it increases drinking behaviors. And possible solutions to these risk factors, or just this knowledge we know from some of the research, we want to inquire about drinking patterns of others in the home. We want to assess levels of other compulsive behaviors. So find out a little bit more about not necessarily gambling for our population, but gaming or even eating habits. And then explore relationships with peer groups from other cultures. Oftentimes we find that when kids are going through their teenage years, there's this very, very intense pressure to fit in. And among that comes some of those risky behaviors, such as like drinking or just risk-taking behaviors as a whole. So it's important to kind of feel out where your clients and their families are in terms of how they identify with their peer groups. And especially if they're experiencing this added pressure of fitting in. We find that a lot, that people kind of refer back to substance abuse as a coping skill, right? It's not an adaptive coping skill, but it is definitely a coping skill for some people. So exploring what else is going on, what are they really trying to cope with, and how can we support them through mental health services. So other cultural barriers to obtaining mental health services, we should really just have a discussion around language. So if we look at this chart right here, 45.7% of children ages 5 and older speak a language other than English at home. And out of this chart, 26.3% speak Spanish. So one of the biggest challenges that we have is there are not enough bilingual providers to provide the services, specifically in Spanish. From my experience, I used to run a clinic, and a lot of my work week to week was figuring out how we would find an intake appointment for a family who only spoke Spanish. And we just had, let's say we had 11 referrals in a week that were coming in for first time appointment for services. And out of those 11, 8 of them were Spanish speaking and 3 of them were English speaking. So depending on your clinic or your agency and the availability that they have for bilingual providers, this was a huge, huge challenge, where we had those clinicians that were already, seeing clients, having a full caseload, and having 8 more clients that we had no idea how we were going to assign them without having our clinicians at about 40 cases each, which is also pretty intense if we're talking about moderate to severe level mental health illness. Okay, so bilingual or not bilingual? So how many of you consider yourselves to be bilingual? And just, you don't have to say it out loud, but you can if you'd like. And how many of you can conduct therapy in Spanish confidently? Not just conversational Spanish, but like how many of you feel confident in the room with a family explaining what PTSD is, or talking about different types of therapy modalities? So one of the things that I encountered during my first couple of years providing therapy in Spanish is that I had to be very honest with my clients at times where when I was first learning how to use some of the more therapeutic / professional language, I had to really be honest with my clients and say, hey, like, I'm bilingual, I speak Spanish and English. Sometimes I will not know the word in Spanish, but I'll know it in English, or vice versa. It might take me a second, or I might have to look it up and just be like, give me a second, let me make sure that I'm using this word properly. And I would consider myself to be pretty fluent in Spanish. At this point, and with my training, I had to conceptualize and present cases and write research papers in Spanish. But prior to that, I thought I was very fluent in Spanish until I had to sit in the room and try to discuss the case in Spanish without being able to refer to some English words. So just think about that for a second. No one expects you to speak Spanish perfectly, but it's important to also be able to have that conversation and just be transparent with families. Like, hey, you know what? It's more important for me to have you understand what I'm saying versus not looking quote unquote bad in front of you for looking a word up. So I've literally just stopped in the middle of the session because I cannot come up with the word. And I'm like, hold on, give me a second. Let me just look it up really quick. And then we come to the understanding that, or all right, that's the word that we were looking for. I'd rather have that than have the families completely misunderstand what I'm trying to explain in the session. Social stigma of mental illness in Latinx community is something else to consider. So family beliefs about accessing help for cosas de la familia. So this is something that comes up a lot where families really like to, especially from collectivistic cultures, they really like to deal with their problems within their family system. So going outside of that isn't always acceptable. The external locus of control es mi castigo. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about, fatalismo, where some people will not access mental health services simply because they believe that it's in God's hands, basically. Latinx men in therapy, there are aspects of machismo such as shame, guilt, and weakness. I have a professor that at Pepperdine who did his dissertation for his doctorate degree on Latinx men and basically their experiences with domestic violence and just things that came up for them. And throughout the qualitative study, what he ended up finding is this common theme of men were in this society that made them feel like talking about emotions was weakness, accessing support was weakness. So oftentimes they were kind of dealt with bottling everything up, and then they would, come home and just the arguments or the situation just would get extremely difficult and explosive because there was never this avenue of them being socially for it being socially acceptable for them to access support systems. So another thing that I like to mention as well, just as a side note with machismo, is oftentimes it's seen as in a negative light, but machismo also has its positive traits. For example, someone that might have this machista ideal in the sense of being a provider for their family, that's something positive. There's other aspects such as making the family a priority. That's something positive that comes with this idea of machismo. So it's not always negative. It's just when we usually talk about it, most people associate machismo as a very negative thing. It definitely does have its negative traits, but there are also some positive things in there, such as, being very, very family oriented as well. Another thing that I usually talk about in this section is I invite you to really explore the other parents' involvement in services with you. So oftentimes when I ask clinicians, whether it's someone that I'm supervising or just even my colleagues, I always like to ask the question of who's involved in treatment. Is it mom? Is it dad? Is it both? And if they share with me that it's mom, I always ask them a follow-up, which is, have you considered inviting the dad? Or have you asked if the dad would like to participate? Oftentimes, a big factor is appointment time. So some families are, their work schedule doesn't really align with the appointments we offer. But then many times we kind of overlook that idea of involving the other parent. So I encourage you definitely to just think back on your caseload if you have one now or if you had one in the past, or even if you're working in other settings or other roles, not just therapy, but how many times does a mom bring a child in for services versus a dad? And in the situations where the dad isn't involved, have you considered asking if the dad would like to be involved? I've seen a lot of kids throughout my lifetime as a therapist. I've been doing therapy for like about 7 years now. And in those 7 years, I could probably tell you that 90% of the families that I work with, it's the mom that comes in for therapy with a child. But I've made it my goal to ask questions and try to invite the fathers as well, because sometimes in some situations, it really just required me to open that space up for the father to participate as well. And many of them felt really grateful because oftentimes they didn't get to be a part of any appointments. It was usually the mom that would go to the school meetings or the dentist appointments. And so the fathers really liked being a part of therapy as well. In addition, faith-based circumstances is another social stigma to consider. This is specifically, if you think about it, being punished. So that's why you're experiencing a mental health illness. Some people relate it to just their faith. Another factor is social political issues in treatment of Latinx community. So discrimination by race, sexuality, gender, skin color, immigration status, and the political climate has a huge impact on accessing services. For example, ICE raids, DACA students, undocumented individuals, or just even political affiliations. So a few years back when the elections happened, I had a lot of families that were Latinx that actually ended up moving back to Mexico with their families because they were just so scared of what the political climate was. And many of them were very skeptical when they would first arrive for their intake sessions. They would always ask me if I would have to report them to ICE for being undocumented. And so I kind of made it part of my limits of confidentiality during informed consent. I would give that information at the very first session, how that whether they were undocumented or not, that wasn't something that I would report to an authority. So just to keep in mind that people might be a little bit skeptical as well to access services simply because they might be afraid of you reporting. Some people don't really know what our role is. And when we talk about limits of confidentiality and we talk about having to make mandated reports, sometimes that really scares people. So it's good to clarify that, hey, even though I have to report, for example, child abuse or risk to self or others, I don't have to report your documentation status. All right, another consideration is history of involvement in systems of care. So previous contact with other systems of care, such as like, let's say, social services. Special consideration for foster youth should be considered, since they might have had multiple placements in foster care, and building rapport might be particularly challenging with this population. Access to healthcare and their experiences with healthcare or hospitals, even the legal system. These are all important things to explore with families. How has their experience been? Have they experienced any discrimination? And if so, how are you, as someone who represents another system of care, are going to address these concerns or these challenges? Microaggressions from organized oppression and systemic racism. Some of these include academic marginalization, linguistic discrimination, even just asking questions like, do you speak English? That is something that some people will say without thinking, but doesn't always have. So someone might be asking that question just as a general, or making a general statement or a general question, without understanding that people might have had other experiences in different systems that made them feel like it's not okay to speak another language. Marginalization due to skin color, or what we call colorism. So some examples that I give is, I don't know how many of you grew up speaking multiple languages, but I remember that when I was growing up, I grew up in Sonoma County, in a very small town. And out of the entire elementary school, there were 5 Latinx students, all of which were myself and my cousins. And everyone else there were white or Caucasian students. So there were several situations that I can think back on where I would be talking to one of my family members in Spanish, and we would get in trouble for it. They would tell us not to speak Spanish because they wanted to know what we were saying. So as a child, we didn't really understand in the moment that it was okay, well, it's because of A, B, and C that they don't want that. We didn't reason that way. So it just felt like it was wrong to speak Spanish. And so you, as a child, you kind of internalize that based on the experiences that you have in these different systems. So it's important to be aware that there are individuals who experience this all the time. And these are just some examples of how this plays a role. Perceptions and beliefs about recovery. So what is therapy anyway? A common thing that I've heard so many clients and families come in saying is, esto es para locos. Is this for crazy people? That's something that you have to address in the moment. And that tells you a little bit about what their perceptions are about therapy and what their system, their family system, probably perceives therapy as. Is my therapist going to fix my child? Or another common one is, la escuela dijo que usted va a resolver el problema. So the school told me that you're going to fix it. So how many of us have experienced that, where parents come into our intake session or our ongoing sessions and expect us to make miracles within an hour of therapy? And then what is mental health? So having that conversation of, what is mental health? What do you believe? What do you perceive it as? And what does your culture, or what does society say about what mental health is? And really exploring that. And el problema es de toda la vida. Another question is this going to be a lifelong problem or obstacle or challenge, right? And I think that's where educating families or clients is very empowering. Letting them know that if you are diagnosing somebody with a very intense, lifelong challenging diagnosis, well, what does that look like for that family, and offering hope, right? I'm also part of Aldea SOAR program, so I work with early intervention in psychosis. And when we provide that initial feedback session and share with the family that their child is experiencing psychosis, or even when we share it with the client themselves, it's a very intense feedback session, but then it's also very empowering because now they can label what is going on. And it's more about, okay, this is the symptoms that I'm experiencing. I'm not the only one. It's not anything I did. This is just what we call this problem or obstacle that I've been experiencing. So diagnosing can either be empowering or it can be stigmatizing. So really, you as a provider can help the family be on either side of that. And so some strategies to engage Latinx families. We want to validate previous experiences of negative encounters in systems of care. We only use clinical jargon as a means to facilitate understanding, not as a method to marginalize. So I avoid using a lot of clinical language. I usually explain it in a very straightforward way, and then I will say, and this is what we call in psychology, this is what we call PTSD. I don't read straight out of the DSM-5 and use that language. I might read the criteria and then maybe explain it further by providing examples, but I make sure that I address where the family is in terms of how I need to express myself in order for them to understand. Some people do really great with books and videos, and so sometimes I don't even have the conversation initially. I just play a short video or read a book with them, and then we go from there and ask questions. Explain concepts, strategies, symptoms in ways consistent with their history and experience, and also empower them to disagree, ask for clarification, etc. So automatically, as a professional, whether you're a therapist, you're a teacher, you're a doctor, you are automatically in a position of power in the eyes of many clients or families that come to see you. So acknowledging that there is a power imbalance. I mean, you wouldn't say that outright, but you would say, so I am your therapist, but also you are the expert of your life, and you know your child, or you know what your needs are. Let's have a conversation about what those needs are. And if there's ever a time where you disagree with me, please be honest so that we can figure it out together. Or if I provide you with strategies that just don't work for you, then feel free to speak up and let me know that that's not working for you, and we can work on it together as a team. So I always address that at intake. I let them know, like, hey, I might be an expert in psychology, but you are the expert in your life. So you're the one who's going to be able to tell me how I can best help you. So let's have that honest dialogue since the beginning. Methods to gain trust in treatment. So self-disclosure, not self-indulgence. The rule of thumb is if you're going to disclose something, then you really have to think about why you're disclosing that information, and whether that's going to be beneficial for the client. Along with self-disclosure, specifically with Latinx families, you are going to consider the fact that it's not as straightforward as they tell you in grad school, or wherever you got your education. One of the things to really consider is that you want to consider questions that are brought up in therapy and whether that's going to help build a relationship and build a trust, or if it's going to make the family feel like they just cannot open up to you. So there are times where people will ask, do you have kids? Are you married? And in some situations, those questions can be inappropriate depending on the context and who's in the room, right? But other times, that's one way for a client to be communicating that they're wondering maybe that you look young, or that it appears, quote unquote, like you might not be a mother or a father, so you might not be able to help them with parenting skills. However, there are other times where there's sometimes like simple questions that the families want to know that make them feel like they can relate to you. So sometimes people ask, hey, like, where's your family from? Or are you Latina? And so I have no problem answering those questions because I feel like that's them trying to connect with me. I've had situations where I've had the issue of gift giving to come up, where like a mom had like made something like a special meal and had brought some in because we happened to have our session right around lunchtime. So some people would just like reject it outright because they have a very strict rule on gift giving. However, in the cultural context, especially with some families within the Latinx culture, you rejecting a meal is very offensive. So obviously it's a case-by-case situation, but just some things to consider, that you're also expecting someone to come in and really just share their most private thoughts with you. And so I think that sharing your favorite color, or perhaps, your favorite food, or just other parts of you that are personal but not too personal, can be helpful in this situation, or in order to help gain trust. In addition, validating challenges of presenting problem and utilizing resiliency-based discourse. So this is like taking a strength-based approach, which is what we usually strive to do as therapists and providers. And also exploring current cultural, familial, traditional patterns of living. So, food, rituals, transition ceremonies, lifestyles, and really that makes them feel like you're connecting with them as well. And it helps us as therapists or providers be more human. Oftentimes they feel like I remember one time, I think I took a vacation, and my one of my clients was like shocked. They couldn't believe I was going on vacation. I was like, yeah, no, I take vacations too, like I like to take time off as well. But it was like a shocker. Or like if I would get like sick or something like that, they would really almost like be a little bit shocked when I'd have to reschedule. So yeah, it just helps humanize you as well in their eyes. All right. So Guadalupe, how are we on time for the exercise?
We can go ahead and do the exercise. You just need about 10 minutes to close up at the end?
Yes, we should have enough time.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I will go ahead and have everyone take just a quick moment to grab a paper and a pen. And for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to stop screen sharing. And what I will do is invite you, if you'd like, to turn on your camera. And what I will be doing is I will ask you to pick a color. So we're going to start off with that. And the colors that you are going to pick from, so go ahead and draw a star on your paper, and at the very top, you're going to draw the color, sorry, not draw, but write the color that you are picking. So your colors are, okay. Your colors are going to be blue, green, purple, or red. So again, that's blue, green, purple, or red. So go ahead and at the very top of your page, just write down what color you're going with, and make sure you keep that in mind. All right, so I'll go ahead and begin for the interest of time. So what you're going to do is you're going to imagine that this star represents your world. So we'll begin by writing your name in the center of the star, making it your very own. Then what you're going to do is you're going to pick a side of the star to begin with. All right. So now what you're going to do is you're going to draw a home on this first side of your star. So you could just do a little, quick little drawing of a house to represent your home if that's what you'd like to use as your symbol. All right, next I'm gonna have you think of a specific family member. This is someone that you've always turned to for advice, or maybe someone who knows how to cheer you up when you're sad. So please write their name on this other side of the star. So first side of the star is the home. Second side of the star is the name of a specific family member. All right, now third side. Draw a picture of your method of transportation, whether it's a car, a bicycle, the bus. Go ahead and put a symbol. Or you can write it if you would like. All right, now on the fourth side, I want you to think of something, a symbol or a word that represents your beliefs. It could be God, La Virgen, or science. Choose whatever is relevant to your personal beliefs and then write or draw it on the fourth side of your star. Okay. And then for the very last one, what are some of your hopes and dreams? Maybe you want to be a millionaire. Maybe you want to be a therapist. Think of a few of your hopes and dreams and write them on this last side of your star. All right, and now can I get a quick thumbs up from everyone if you're ready for the next step? Okay, awesome. We are now ready to begin. So congratulations, each one of you is now a potential client at Aldea, and you are about to begin your mental health treatment process. So go ahead and find the side with the name of your family member, and just go ahead and just place your finger on it. So you decide that it will be easiest to throw a few tantrums because you don't know how to express how bad you're feeling. Luckily, you have your family member that can call for an intake appointment. After all, you are only 6 years old, but you need some serious help. So if you have a blue star, your family member has no problem with it. They want to figure out why you've been acting so different lately. So leave your star alone. If you have a green or purple star, your family member is hesitant. They are under the impression that you are just being achiqueado or spoiled. Please put an X on this side of your star. If you have a red star, your family member decides to make the call, but not after using physical abuse as punishment after every tantrum. If you have a red star, please black out this side of your star. You have now joined the nearly 1 in 6 children who have encountered an adverse experience throughout their childhood. All right, now find the side with the picture of your means of transportation. With most of you having such good luck with your family member, you decide that your first appointment should be first thing tomorrow. If you have a purple star, the call with the intake coordinator does not go exactly how you planned. The coordinator offers the appointment you need, but dad will have the car for work tomorrow. Go ahead and put an X on this side of your star, as the appointment may happen, but not tomorrow. If you have a blue star, your family member shares the great news that tomorrow you're supposed to meet some lady who's going to figure out why you've been acting strange lately. They let you know that they will always be there to support you. Leave your star alone. If you have a green or red star, your family member gives you the disappointing news that there is no money to take the bus and you have no way of getting to the appointment. If you have a green or red star, please black out this side of your star. All right, now you're gonna find the side with the picture of your home. After having your appointment scheduled with the weird lady that's supposed to help you feel better, things start to look up and you're hopeful you will start to feel normal again, and it makes you smile. If you have a purple or blue star, you grab your favorite blanket and stuffed animal and head to sleep. After all, tomorrow life will start to get better. If you have a green star, you overhear your mom and dad talking on the phone with Tia, saying that the landlord raised the rent and he or she does not know how she will make ends meet. If you have a green star, please go ahead and place an X on this side. If you have a red star, your mom and dad comes over to you and says that you will need to grab your favorite bear because the landlord just kicked your family out due to another rent increase that you cannot afford. If you have a red star, go ahead and black out this side of your star. All right, now you're gonna find the star that represents your beliefs. After all that trouble, you finally made it to the appointment with the weird lady, but to your surprise, she's actually pretty nice and her office has really cool toys that she lets you play with. After asking mom and dad about 6 billion questions, the weird but nice lady asks you if you would like to come back and play again next week. If you have a blue star, you say yes, and your mom and dad praise you for being so brave, and they go on to tell you that they think the lady can help. If you have a green or purple star, your mom and dad explains that they are not sure if they'll be able to bring you back because it's too hard to find a way to make it to the appointments. But maybe, just maybe, you can take the 3 buses and walk 4 blocks to make it by 3:15 p.m. You can tell that your mom and dad look worried, and they tell you that they don't know what this therapy thing is, but they will give it a try. If you have a purple or a green star, please go ahead and place an X. If you have a red star, you responded yes, but as soon as you leave the appointment, your mom and dad states that that therapy is for crazy people and that they will just pray it gets better. This shatters your hopes, and your mom and dad says, si Dios lo quiere, así será. If God wants it to be, then it will. If you have a red star, please black out this side of your star. Finally, the side with your hopes and dreams. Now, fast forward a few years. Your future lies ahead of you as a child who will have to battle PTSD. Your hopes and dreams and your wishes for the perfect life, for some of you, those are all that remain. If you have a purple, blue, or green star, these hopes and dreams are what keeps you going. Most of you have been met with some adversity since you're beginning your treatment process, but you have managed to continue to live a happy and healthy life. Your personal hopes and dreams become a reality. If you have a red star, you fall into despair. You have been met with adversity after adversity, and you find it impossible to accomplish your lifelong goals without the support and love of your family and friends. You become depressed, and with nowhere else to turn, many of you begin to abuse drugs and alcohol as you grow older. If you have a red star, please go ahead and black it out. You are now part of the many children who never overcome their mental health illness. All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen again. All right, is everyone able to see that? All right, so now that we've completed the exercise, so how many of you, well, let's get some of the people who had, so anyone other than the people with the blue star, how was this, this exercise for you?
Horrible.
Okay, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I am struggling from mental health, and I have a lot of things have gone wrong in my life. So, I don't know. It makes me reflect a lot.
Mm-hmm. And then what about the others? So which one of you was kind of catching on to the fact that the blue star was going to have it pretty bad during this exercise? Yeah. So after being or engaging in that exercise, I have some reflection questions. So what are some of the privileges that you never considered having until now?
One of them for me was the transportation, but it's not so much I didn't when you were talking growing up as a child, I would take the bus. I'd take 2 buses and I'd walk, I don't know how far to get to school when I was a kindergartner. And it was that way always with my mom. That's just how I remember growing up, but it was so far, like such a long time ago that I forget now that I own my own car. I've been owning my own car for quite a bit now and had access to my dad's car for a while that, I went through that. But unfortunately, there's some families that continue going through that. So it just helped me reflect on kind of how things were for me, but how that unfortunately some things don't change for some families. And I remember transportation was difficult. It was not easy because the bus just never on time. And if you miss a bus, oh my gosh, like that's just, yeah. But also being purple, I got purple and I like my star had like a bunch of X's in some parts, but then kind of like the hopes and dreams. It's funny because as a kiddo, when things were tough, I've always been a dreamer and like that's what pushed me forward. And I feel like the same with my parents. So I don't know. I feel like I related a lot to this activity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else that would like to share their experience during the exercise? Go ahead, Alice.
It made me realize what a privilege it is to have a family that acknowledges mental health, that would be supportive of even taking their youth to services. So I was a red star, so everything was blacked out.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, so part of what this exercise, I think, really, it's one thing to talk about the different barriers that are out there, but I think it's just something, it's something completely different when you actually go through this exercise and you realize like, hey, maybe next time that my client shows up late, I should explore a little bit why that is, and not make the assumption that they're just not interested in the service. I have always been humbled by this work, even on days where I felt like I had it really tough in the moment. I remember driving home after my sessions and thinking to myself, like, I need to count my blessings and be grateful today because this family literally just told me that they can't even afford to get, soap to take showers. I had a family that used to use dish soap because they couldn't afford to buy both. So they would just take their kiddos a bath with dish soap. And so when I'd get home, I'd be like, wow, like I just having a roof over my head and food in the fridge it's a blessing on its own. So part of it too is going into it and being humble about your approach with families and really acknowledging all of the potential barriers that could be present and just finding the resources or even just asking the questions to lead you to be able to provide the support to have them be able to be a part of the services and accessing that support. So I'm glad that we were able to really engage in this dialogue, and hopefully this allows you to consider these factors in the future. That is it for the presentation. Are there any questions or comments that any of you would like to make before we wrap up?
I did want to say about the activity that I'm very new to the field. I just graduated a couple years ago, but even in that amount of time, just reminders like I felt that it was it was a difficult activity, but I do feel that it's very centering. And just by that, I mean that, like you said, there's more to it than, oh, they just don't care, or they don't want to be in services, and even the cultural barriers and the social stigmas are at play here. But at the end of the day, you know, treating each other with kindness and being compassionate and viewing things from that lens, I think is something that is always in need of constant reminding for all of us, just because it's so easy to get jaded, and it's hard when you're kind of like up against just like a brick wall and you're not making any progress with a client, or they're not making progress, or they're just in a tough place in their life. So I just think that these reminders are really good to just remind us that we are here to serve the people who come to us for these services, and we're not here to judge them. And if they don't care, then okay, then they don't care, and then we like move on to the next thing. But I think that was a great activity to just bring us back to center.
Thank you, Guadalupe, for sharing. Yeah, one of the courses that I have the privilege of teaching at Pepperdine is the multicultural counseling, and we really talk about addressing privilege and avoiding stereotyping and all of that. But one of the biggest goals of that course, and I think that all programs should have this be a goal, is for everyone to become aware of their privileges and just aware of the potential barriers and how they can address them with clients and families moving forward. There were times where I found out that I had privileges that I had never imagined or thought about. I just went on about my life, and then I realized, like, I was in a room full of Latinx women in my program, and hearing others share their experiences of being a darker skin Latinx female, and their treatment versus what I had experienced was just really just mind-blowing at times, because I had never imagined that I experienced that level of privilege. So just little things like that are important to consider, but make such a big difference for the services that you provide. So thank you all so much. Let us know if you have any additional questions. I really appreciate you sharing this space with me. I know everyone's super busy, but thank you for your time, and we hope to hear back from you.
Yeah, and if in the chat I went ahead and put the links to the sign-in, so if you haven't had a chance to sign in just yet, if you could please use the link, and then the evaluation for today is also in the chat. So thank you everybody for being here today, and we really appreciate your patience with some technical difficulties earlier. Sorry we got started late, but I'm really glad that we were able to fit in the activity this time. We've took the feedback from last time and made the training longer. So I'm happy that we were able to do that. So if you could just sign in and also fill out the link. I'm about to send out the email. So we'll have some resources there if you're looking for a DSM in Spanish. There's a couple things a couple resources for that. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany.
Where's the link to sign in again?
It's in the chat. Let me go ahead and put it right at the end. I see some people have been chatting. So I just popped it in the chat. So if you just click the link in the chat, it'll take you to the sign-in form.
Okay, so I'm just tapped on there. And then, okay. Tap here to chat or tap a message to reply. Is that just more of a chat thing or sign? Let me see.
Yeah, if you open up the chat, I think if it'll show you the history of what's in there.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And form today. Okay,
Perfect.
sorry.
No, no worries. I'm glad you found it.
And then you, in that chat, we'll also have the document, the form to fill out, not just sign in, but
The evaluation, I'll pop that
Yeah.
right there for you.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
And Guadalupe, I'm gonna go ahead and make you host. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting, and I will see you soon, Noelle.
Okay, thank you.